My name is David, and today I'm going to tell you about the moment I realized I'd been running from something I could never outrun, my own shame. Before I go any further, I want to ask you something. If this story touches something in you, if you recognize the weight of shame in your own life, please subscribe to this channel, share it with someone who might need to hear these words, and leave a comment telling me about your own struggle. Because shame thrives in silence, and speaking it out loud is often the first step toward freedom. I was 34 years old when the shame finally caught up with me. But the truth is, I'd been carrying it for over a decade. It had shaped every decision I'd made, every relationship I'd avoided, every dream I'd abandoned. It was the lens through which I saw myself, and that lens told me I was fundamentally broken, unworthy, unredeemable. From the outside, my life looked fine. I worked as a graphic designer for a marketing firm in Denver. I had my own apartment, paid my bills on time, stayed out of trouble. But inside, I was hollow, empty, going through the motions of a life while convinced that if anyone really knew me, really knew what I'd done, who I'd been, they'd see what I saw, someone who didn't deserve good things. The shame had roots that went back 12 years to when I was 22. Fresh out of college, working my first real job, making decent money for the first time in my life, and I'd made a series of decisions that I'd spent every day since trying to forget. I'd gotten involved in something I shouldn't have. Nothing illegal, technically, but deeply unethical. I'd helped my boss falsify client reports, inflate numbers, lie to people who trusted us. I told myself I was just following orders, that I needed the job, that everyone bent the rules sometimes. But I knew it was wrong, and I did it anyway. When it all came out, when the company was investigated, and several people lost their jobs, their reputations, their livelihoods, I'd managed to escape consequences. I was low enough on the totem pole that investigators didn't focus on me. I quietly left the company, moved to a new city, started over. But I couldn't escape myself. I couldn't escape the knowledge of what I'd done, the people I'd hurt, the trust I'd betrayed, the person I'd revealed myself to be. For 12 years, I'd carried that shame like a physical weight. It colored everything. When someone complimented my work, I thought, if you knew what I did, you wouldn't say that. When I met someone new, I kept them at arm's length, convinced that if they got too close, they'd see the rot inside. When opportunities came my way, I sabotaged them because part of me believed I didn't deserve success. I'd tried to outrun it, moved cities 3 times, changed jobs, changed friend groups, threw myself into work, convinced that if I could just be excellent enough now, it would somehow balance out what I'd done then. But excellence didn't erase shame. It just exhausted me. I'd tried to bury it, avoided thinking about it, changed the subject when conversations veered too close to my past, kept myself busy so I didn't have to sit with my thoughts. But buried shame doesn't disappear. It just festers. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening. I'd been working late, alone in the office, finishing a project, and my computer froze. As I waited for it to restart, I found myself scrolling through old emails, old files, and I stumbled across something from that job 12 years ago. A report I'd helped falsify, a lie I'd helped tell. And suddenly it all came flooding back, not just the memory, but the crushing weight of what I'd done, the faces of people who'd been hurt, the knowledge that I'd compromised everything I claimed to believe in for a paycheck and job security. I sat there in the empty office and felt like I couldn't breathe. The shame was suffocating, and I realized, 12 years later, and it was just as heavy as it had been the day I'd walked away, maybe heavier, because now I'd spent 12 years proving that I was exactly who I feared I was, someone who runs, who hides, who can't face what he's done. I drove home in a daze, sat in my apartment, and for the first time in years, maybe ever, I prayed. Not the casual rote prayers I'd said as a kid in church, real prayer, desperate prayer. God, I don't know if you're listening. I don't know if you care about someone like me, but I can't carry this anymore. I did something terrible 12 years ago, and I can't escape it. I can't fix it. I can't undo it. and I don't know how to live with who that makes me. If you're real, if you care, I need help. Because I'm drowning in shame and I don't know how to get free. I sat in the silence, not expecting anything, but as I sat there, a thought came to me. Not a voice, not dramatic, just a thought that felt different from my usual thoughts. Clearer, calmer. I see your shame, but it doesn't define you. I opened my eyes, startled. That wasn't something I would think. My shame absolutely defined me. It was the core truth about who I was, wasn't it? But the thought persisted. I see your shame, but it doesn't define you. I grabbed my phone and typed it in my notes app so I wouldn't forget. I see your shame, but it doesn't define you. I stared at the words. They felt both impossible and desperately needed. Could it be true? Could there be a version of me that wasn't defined by the worst thing I'd done? I didn't sleep that night. I kept reading those words, turning them over in my mind, wanting to believe them, but not knowing how. The next morning, exhausted and raw, I did something I hadn't done in over a decade. I went to church. Not the big, anonymous megachurch I occasionally attended when I felt guilty enough. A smaller community church a colleague had mentioned once. I slipped in late, sat in the back, arms crossed defensively. The worship music felt too intimate, too vulnerable. But I stayed. The pastor, a woman in her 40s named Grace, which felt almost too on the nose, spoke about a passage in Romans, about how there's no condemnation for those in Christ Jesus, about how God doesn't define us by our failures, but by His love. Some of you are carrying shame that's crushing you, she said, and I felt like she was looking directly at me, even though I knew she couldn't pick me out in the crowd. You've convinced yourself that what you did or what was done to you is who you are, but that's not how God sees you. He sees the shame. He knows it's there, but He doesn't let it have the final word about your identity. After the service, I found myself approaching her. My hands were shaking. Can I talk to you? About shame? She smiled kindly. Of course, let's sit. In the empty sanctuary, I told her a version of my story. Not all the details, I wasn't ready for that, but enough. The mistake I'd made, the shame I'd carried, the inability to forgive myself. David, can I tell you something? She said when I finished. Shame tells us we are what we've done, but God says we are who He says we are, and He says you're His child, loved, forgiven, worthy of redemption. But I don't deserve that. None of us do. That's what grace means. It's not about deserving. It's about being loved despite not deserving it. I wanted to believe her. But 12 years of shame had built walls that couldn't come down in one conversation. We have a group, Grace said. Meets Wednesday evenings. People dealing with shame, guilt, past mistakes they can't seem to move past. Would you consider coming? I almost said no. The thought of being in a room with other people, possibly having to share more of my story, it terrified me. But something about those words I'd heard the night before, I see your shame, but it doesn't define you, made me nod. Okay, I'll try. That week I couldn't stop thinking about those words. I see your shame, but it doesn't define you. They challenged everything I'd believed about myself for 12 years. My shame was a secret I'd guarded carefully. I'd never told anyone the full story. I'd convinced myself that if I just kept it hidden, kept it contained, I could manage it. But managing it had meant managing my whole life, keeping people at a distance, sabotaging opportunities, living small. Wednesday evening came, and I almost didn't go. I sat in my car outside the church for 20 minutes, anxiety warring with something else, a desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, these words could be true. Finally, I walked in. The group was small, maybe 8 people gathered in a circle in a side room. Grace welcomed me warmly and introduced me to the others. I mumbled my name and sat down, prepared to listen but not share. As people talked about mistakes they'd made, shame they carried, the struggle to believe they could be more than their worst moments, I recognized myself in their stories. These were people who knew what it was like to be haunted by the past, to feel defined by failure, to wonder if redemption was really possible. When it was my turn to share, I said, "I'm David, and I've been carrying shame for 12 years. I don't really know how to talk about it yet, but I'm here because I can't carry it alone anymore." The group nodded. No judgment, no pressure for details, just understanding. After the meeting, a man named Marcus approached me. "First time is the hardest," he said. "I've been coming for 6 months, and I'm finally starting to believe that what I did doesn't have to be who I am." "Does it get easier?" I asked. "Not easier, but clearer. You start to see the difference between acknowledging what you did and believing that's all you are. That's a crucial difference. Driving home that night, I felt something I hadn't felt in 12 years, a sliver of hope. Not hope that my past would change or that what I'd done would somehow be undone, but hope that maybe I could learn to live as someone who'd made terrible mistakes without being defined entirely by those mistakes. I didn't know how to get there, didn't know if I even could, but for the first time in over a decade, I wanted to try. "I see your shame, but it doesn't define you." Could those words be true? Could I learn to believe them? I didn't know, but I was finally ready to find out. The first Wednesday evening group changed something in me. Not dramatically, not like a switch flipping, but there was a crack in the wall I'd built around my shame, a tiny opening that let in the possibility that maybe, just maybe, I could be more than my worst mistake. Over the next few days, I kept thinking about what Marcus had said. You start to see the difference between acknowledging what you did and believing that's all you are. I'd spent 12 years conflating those two things. Acknowledging what I'd done had become the same as believing that's who I was. The mistake and my identity had merged into one inseparable thing. But what if they weren't the same? What if I could say, yes, I did something terrible, without also saying, therefore I am terrible? The question haunted me, challenged me, terrified me. At work, I noticed how automatically I operated from shame. A co-worker complimented a design I'd created, and my immediate internal response was, if you knew what I did 12 years ago, you wouldn't think I was capable of good work. Project manager asked if I wanted to lead a new campaign, and I heard myself declining, even though I wanted to do it, because some part of me believed I didn't deserve the opportunity. For the first time, I was seeing how much shame was driving my decisions, how it had become the invisible force shaping my entire life. The second Wednesday, I went back to the group. This time, I didn't sit in my car debating. I walked in, sat down, and when it was my turn to share, I said more than I had the first time. "I'm David. Last week I said I've been carrying shame for 12 years. This week, I'm starting to see how much that shame has controlled me. How I've let what I did 12 years ago determine what I believe I'm allowed to have now. How I've been living small because I think that's what I deserve." Grace, the pastor who led the group, nodded. "That's a huge realization, David. Shame doesn't just make us feel bad, it makes us believe we should feel bad, that we deserve to feel bad, that we should limit our lives as punishment for what we've done." A woman named Carla, probably in her 50s, spoke up. "I've been carrying shame for 23 years, for an affair that destroyed my first marriage, and for 23 years I've believed I don't deserve to be happy. Every good thing that comes my way, I sabotage it because I think I should suffer for what I did. This group is teaching me that's not what God wants. That's not redemption. That's just ongoing punishment I'm inflicting on myself." Her words resonated. Ongoing punishment I'm inflicting on myself. That's exactly what it was. I'd become my own judge, jury, and executioner, and I'd sentenced myself to a lifetime of smallness, distance, and self-limitation. "Here's what I want you to understand," Grace said. "Shame says, I am bad. Guilt says, I did something bad. They're different. Guilt can lead to repentance, to making amends, to change. But shame just paralyzes us. It makes us believe we're irredeemable." She paused, looking at each of us. God doesn't deal in shame. He deals in conviction that leads to redemption. He says, yes, you did something wrong, but that doesn't make you wrong. You're still mine. You're still loved. You're still capable of being transformed. After the meeting, Marcus pulled me aside. "You shared more tonight. That's good. Every time you speak your shame out loud, it loses a little bit of power. It doesn't feel like it's losing power. It feels just as heavy. It will for a while. But trust me, shame thrives in secrecy. When you drag it into the light, when you let other people see it and don't reject you for it, that's when it starts to lose its grip." I wanted to believe him. But I'd only shared the broad strokes. I hadn't told them the specifics. Hadn't told them exactly what I'd done, how many people had been affected, how I'd escaped consequences while others suffered. At home that night, I opened my laptop and did something I'd avoided for 12 years. I looked up what had happened to the company I'd worked for, what had happened to the people involved. The company had been heavily fined and lost major clients. My old boss had lost his license, his reputation. Several co-workers had been blacklisted in the industry, and the clients we'd defrauded. Some had sued, some had simply been left with losses they couldn't recover. I read through articles, comments, forum posts, and the weight of what I'd been part of crushed me all over again. Real people, real consequences, real damage. I told myself for years that I was just a small part of it, that I'd been following orders, that I'd been young and stupid. But reading the aftermath, I couldn't hide behind those excuses. I'd participated. I'd helped. I'd known it was wrong and done it anyway. I closed my laptop and sat in the dark, tears streaming down my face. How could I not be defined by this? How could words like loved and redeemed apply to someone who'd done what I'd done? I picked up my phone and looked at the words I'd saved. "I see your shame, but it doesn't define you." If God saw my shame, really saw it, knew every detail of what I'd done and who I'd hurt, how could he say it didn't define me? How could he look at the wreckage I'd helped create and still call me his? The next day at work, I was distracted, haunted by what I'd read. My manager, Helen, noticed. "David, you okay? You seem off." "Just dealing with some personal stuff. Anything I can help with?" I almost said no automatically, but something made me pause. "Can I ask you something? If you found out someone did something really wrong years ago, something that hurt people, would you think that's who they are forever? Or can people change?" Helen looked at me thoughtfully. "I think people can change, but I also think change requires really facing what you did, not just running from it." "Why do you ask?" "Just thinking about second chances, whether people deserve them." "Everyone deserves a chance to be better than their worst moment," she said. "But I think we have to earn it by actually becoming better, not just by time passing." Her words stayed with me. Had I become better, or had I just become better at hiding? That Sunday, I went back to the church. Pastor Grace preached on the story of Peter, how he'd denied Jesus 3 times, how he'd failed spectacularly at the most crucial moment, and how Jesus had restored him, had given him a new identity despite his failure. Peter's denial didn't define him, Grace said. Not because it wasn't serious, it was. Not because it didn't matter, it did. But because Jesus refused to let Peter's worst moment be his final identity. Jesus saw the shame, acknowledged the failure, and said, "You're still mine. You're still called. You're still loved." After the service, I found Grace in the lobby. "Can I talk to you? Privately?" We sat in her office, and I told her more of the story, more details about what I'd done, the falsified reports, the clients who'd been deceived, the people who'd lost their jobs while I'd slipped away. "I keep hearing that my shame doesn't define me," I said. "But how can it not? I did real damage. I hurt real people, and I never faced consequences. I just ran." Grace was quiet for a moment. "David, can I ask you something? Have you ever tried to make amends? Have you ever reached out to the people affected or done anything to try to repair the damage?" "No, I was too afraid, too ashamed. And also, what could I do? The damage was done. An apology wouldn't undo it. You're right, it wouldn't undo it. But amends aren't about undoing the past. They're about taking responsibility for it, about saying, I did this, I was wrong, I'm sorry. And if there's anything I can do to make it even slightly better, I want to try. But what if they hate me? What if they tell me I'm unforgivable? That's possible. But David, right now, you're living as if you're unforgivable anyway. You've made that decision for yourself. What if, instead of running from your shame, you turned and faced it? Not to be destroyed by it, but to take responsibility for it, and then let God redeem it. Her words terrified me. Facing it meant potentially facing the anger, the hurt, the consequences I'd avoided for 12 years. But she was right. I was already living as if I were unforgivable. What did I have to lose? At the next Wednesday group, I shared what Grace had said. She thinks I need to try to make amends, to reach out to people I hurt and take responsibility. But I'm terrified. Marcus nodded. I did that. 2 years into my journey with shame. I'd hurt someone badly through my actions, and I reached out to apologize. They told me to never contact them again. It was brutal, but you know what? I'd taken responsibility. I'd tried, and that freed something in me. I could finally stop running. Carla added, I wrote letters to my ex-husband, to his family, to people who'd been hurt by my affair. Some responded with forgiveness. Some didn't respond at all. Some told me I was selfish for even reaching out. But I'd faced it. I'd owned it. And for the first time in 20 years, I could look in the mirror without immediately looking away. Their stories gave me courage, not to expect forgiveness or acceptance, but to stop running. Over the next week, I started making a list. People I could potentially reach out to. What I might say. How I might take responsibility without making it about seeking absolution for myself. It was terrifying. But there was also something clarifying about it. For 12 years, I'd been paralyzed by shame. Maybe action, even terrifying action, was the way forward. At home, I started writing a letter to my old boss, not to excuse myself, not to ask for forgiveness, but to say I participated in what happened. I was wrong. I've spent 12 years running from what I did. I'm done running. I take responsibility. I wrote and rewrote it a dozen times. Each time I wanted to add explanations, justifications, softening language. But Grace's words kept coming back. Taking responsibility means saying I did this without the but that follows. Finally, I had a version that was simply honest. No excuses, no justifications, just this is what I did. I was wrong. I'm sorry I didn't send it yet. I wasn't ready. But I had it, and writing it had shifted something. In my journal that night, I wrote, 2 weeks ago, I heard words that challenged everything I believed about myself. I see your shame, but it doesn't define you. I'm starting to understand what that means. It doesn't mean the shame isn't real, or that what I did doesn't matter. It means that acknowledging my failure doesn't have to mean accepting that failure as my permanent identity. I'm learning there's a difference between I did something terrible and I am terrible. Between I hurt people and I am irredeemable. Between running from my shame and facing it so it can be redeemed. I don't know if the people I hurt will ever forgive me. I don't know if I'll ever fully forgive myself. But I'm learning that maybe that's not the point. Maybe the point is learning to receive the forgiveness God offers, even when I don't think I deserve it. Learning to believe that His definition of me, loved, His, redeemable, is more true than my shame's definition of me, broken, beyond repair, permanently stained. It's hard, so hard. Every instinct tells me to keep hiding, keep running, keep living small as punishment for what I did. But I'm starting to see that's not what God wants. That's not redemption. That's just ongoing shame masquerading as righteousness. God sees my shame, really sees it, knows every detail. And He says it doesn't define me. I'm learning to believe that might be true. 2 weeks in and I was just beginning. The shame was still heavy. The past still haunted me. But something had shifted. I'd stopped running, at least internally. I'd started facing what I'd done instead of just carrying it in silence. And in that facing, in that honesty, there was the beginning of something that felt almost like freedom. 3 weeks into learning that my shame didn't have to define me, I did the hardest thing I'd done in 12 years. I pressed send on the email to my former boss. The days leading up to that moment had been excruciating. I'd carried the drafted letter around like a weight, reading and rereading it, alternating between determination to send it and terror about what might happen if I did. At the Wednesday group, I'd told them I'd written it, but couldn't bring myself to send it. "What are you most afraid of?" Grace asked. "That he'll tell me what I already know, that I'm unforgivable, that I'm a coward who ran while others suffered, that I don't deserve to move on. And if he does say that, then what?" I thought about it. "Then at least I'll have faced it. At least I won't still be running." Marcus had said something that stuck with me. When I reached out to make amends, I had to accept that I wasn't doing it to get something back. Not forgiveness, not absolution, not permission to feel better about myself. I was doing it because it was the right thing to do. The only thing I could control was my own action, not their response. His words had helped me understand. Sending the email wasn't about getting my old boss to tell me I was okay. It was about finally taking responsibility, regardless of how he responded. So on a Thursday evening, hands shaking, I opened my email, attached the letter, typed his address that I'd tracked down through LinkedIn, and pressed send before I could talk myself out of it. Then I sat in the silence of my apartment, heart pounding, feeling simultaneously terrified and lighter. I'd done it. After 12 years of running, I'd turned around and faced it. I didn't expect a response. Didn't know if he'd even read it, but I'd sent it. That was something I couldn't take back. And surprisingly, I didn't want to. The next 2 days were agony. I checked my email obsessively, jumping every time my phone buzzed, but there was nothing. At work, I was distracted. Helen noticed again. "David, seriously, what's going on with you lately?" I made a split-second decision, to be honest. I did something I'm not proud of, years ago, and I'm finally trying to take responsibility for it. It's hard. She looked at me with more respect than I expected. "That takes courage. Most people never do that. They just carry it and hope it goes away." "Did it work? For you, I mean. Have you had to do something like that?" She smiled sadly. "Yeah. I had a drinking problem in my 20s, said and did things that hurt people. Getting sober meant facing what I'd done, making amends where I could. It was brutal, but it was also the only way forward." "Did everyone forgive you?" "No. Some people told me to never contact them again. Some people accepted my apology but didn't want a relationship. Some people forgave me, but here's what I learned. Their response wasn't the point. Taking responsibility was the point. I couldn't control whether they forgave me. I could only control whether I faced what I'd done." Her words echoed what Marcus had said, what Grace had taught. The response wasn't the point. The facing it was the point. 3 days after I'd sent the email, I got a response. My hands shook as I opened it. It was short, direct. "David, I remember you. I remember what you did, what we all did. I served 3 years of professional probation and lost most of my clients. My reputation never recovered. I've spent years angry about what happened, and yes, angry at people like you who got away without consequences. But I've also spent years in therapy dealing with my own guilt and shame over my part in it. I was the one in charge. I was the one who created the culture where that happened. I was the one who should have known better. I don't know what you want from this email. If you want forgiveness, I can't give that to you. That's between you and God. If you want absolution, I can't offer that either. What happened, happened. We can't undo it. But I will say this, I respect that you reached out. Most people never do. They just run and hope time erases it. It doesn't. I hope you've become someone different than you were 12 years ago. I know I have. Not better, necessarily, but different. More honest about my failures. Less convinced I'm above making mistakes. That's all I have to say. Robert. I read the email 3 times. It wasn't forgiveness, but it wasn't condemnation either. It was honest, raw, real, and somehow It was exactly what I needed. Not permission to feel better, not absolution, just acknowledgement. He'd seen my email, he'd responded. I hadn't been rejected or destroyed by facing him. At the Wednesday group, I shared the whole thing. The email I'd sent, the response I'd received, how it felt. I don't feel absolved, I said, but I feel, I don't know, clearer, like I'm not hiding anymore. Like I faced the thing I was most afraid of facing, and I survived it. Grace smiled. That's exactly it, David. Shame loses its power when we drag it into the light, when we stop hiding from it and just face it honestly. It doesn't erase what happened, but it breaks shame's hold on us. Carla nodded. When I made my amends, some people slammed the door in my face, literally, but I'd faced them. I'd said what needed to be said. And for the first time in 20 years I could breathe, because I wasn't running anymore. Over the next week, I thought about what else I needed to face. The email to Robert was one step, but there were others. Clients who'd been affected, co-workers who'd lost their jobs. Some I couldn't reach. I didn't have contact information and couldn't find them. But there was one co-worker, Jennifer, who I'd been particularly close with at that job. She'd been let go in the aftermath, and I'd watched her struggle to find new work while I'd quietly slipped away to a new city. I found her on LinkedIn. She was working again, seemed to be doing okay, but I owed her an acknowledgement, an apology. I drafted another letter, shorter than the one to Robert. Just, I was part of what happened. I'm sorry. I should have been honest then. I should have faced consequences alongside you instead of running. I can't undo that, but I want you to know I take responsibility for my part in it. I sent it before I could overthink it. This time, I didn't obsessively check my email. I'd done what I needed to do. The response, or lack of response, wasn't in my control. Jennifer responded 2 days later. Her email was longer, angrier than Robert's. David, I'm glad you finally decided to take responsibility. 12 years later. After I lost my job, couldn't find work for 8 months, nearly lost my apartment, after I had to explain in every job interview why there was a gap in my resume and why I'd left that company. You want forgiveness? Congratulations on your courage. I don't have that for you. I'm still angry, still dealing with the impact of what happened. Your apology doesn't change that. But fine, you said it. You took responsibility. Good for you. I hope it helps you sleep at night. Jennifer, her email stung. The anger was palpable, and I realized I'd hoped for something different, some small sign that my apology mattered, that it helped somehow. But Marcus's words came back to me. You're not doing it to get something back. You're doing it because it's the right thing to do. At my next therapy session, I'd started seeing a therapist named Dr. Yolanda Chen 2 weeks ago at Grace's recommendation. I shared about both emails. How does it feel? Dr. Chen asked. Getting 2 very different responses? Robert's felt like closure almost. Not forgiveness, but acknowledgement. Jennifer's felt like getting hit in the face with the reality of the damage I caused. And which one was more important? I thought about that. Both, I guess. Robert's showed me that facing it wouldn't destroy me. Jennifer's reminded me that what I did was real and had real consequences. I needed both truths. David, I want you to consider something. For 12 years, you've been living in a story where you're the irredeemable villain, where your shame is the most important truth about you. But what if there's a more complex story, one where, yes, you made serious mistakes, yes, you hurt people, and also, you're someone who's capable of growth, of facing hard truths, of taking responsibility even when it's terrifying. Can both things be true? I don't know how to hold both things. That's what we're learning. How to acknowledge the harm you caused without letting that be your entire identity. How to take responsibility without drowning in shame. How to move forward without pretending the past didn't happen. Her words stayed with me. Could both things be true? Could I be someone who'd done something terrible and someone who was capable of redemption? That Sunday, Pastor Grace preached on the story of the prodigal son. The son who'd taken his inheritance, squandered it, hit rock bottom. And when he came home, his father didn't say, You're still my son, but barely. You're tainted now. You'll always be the one who screwed up." The father said, "You were dead and are alive again. You were lost and are found. Full restoration, complete welcome." "Here's what shame does," Grace said. "It tells us we're still in the pig pen, still covered in filth, still unworthy of coming home. But the Father's love doesn't wait for us to clean ourselves up first. It runs toward us while we're still covered in shame, while we're still rehearsing our apology, and says, 'You're mine, you're home, you're restored.'" After the service, I approached Grace. I sent the emails, made amends to my old boss and a former co-worker. How did it go? Mixed. One was accepting, I guess. The other was angry, still hurting from what happened. And how do you feel? Exposed, vulnerable, but also, I'm not hiding anymore. For the first time in 12 years, people know what I did, and I'm still here, still standing. That feels significant. It is significant. David, you're learning something crucial. Your shame doesn't get to be the secret that controls your whole life anymore. You've dragged it into the light, and the light didn't destroy you. That's freedom beginning. And that evening, I wrote in my journal, 3 weeks ago I heard words that started to change everything. I see your shame, but it doesn't define you. This week, I tested whether that could be true. I faced the people I'd hurt, took responsibility, stopped running, and I discovered something. Facing shame doesn't destroy you. Hiding from it does. Robert's response wasn't forgiveness, but it was acknowledgement. Jennifer's response was angry, and I deserved that anger. Both responses taught me something important. I can't control whether people forgive me. I can only control whether I take responsibility, and taking responsibility, really facing what I did instead of running from it, that's breaking shame's hold on me. Not all at once, not completely, but piece by piece. I'm learning that shame thrives in secrecy, in hiding, in the lies we tell ourselves about being irredeemable. But when you drag shame into the light, when you say honestly, "Yes, I did this and it was wrong," shame loses its power to define you. I did something terrible 12 years ago. That's true, but I'm also someone who's learning to face hard truths, to take responsibility, to stop running. That's also true. Maybe both things can be true. Maybe I can acknowledge the harm I caused without letting that be my only identity. Maybe God really does see my shame, but refuse to let it define me. I'm starting to believe that might be possible. 3 weeks in, and I'd done what I'd been too afraid to do for 12 years. I'd faced it, not perfectly, not with guaranteed positive outcomes, but honestly. And in that facing, in that honesty, there was the beginning of freedom I'd never thought possible. 6 weeks into learning that my shame didn't define me, I discovered something unexpected. Being honest about my past made me more helpful to others, not less. It started with a conversation at work. Our firm had hired a new junior designer named Alex, fresh out of college, eager but clearly anxious about making mistakes. I watched him check and recheck his work obsessively, apologize for things that didn't need apologies, and generally carry himself like someone terrified of being exposed as inadequate. I recognized that posture. It was how I'd lived for 12 years. One afternoon, I found him in the break room, staring at his laptop with that defeated look I knew too well. "Rough day?" I asked. "I made a mistake on a client presentation. Small thing, but I caught it too late. Helen was understanding, but I feel like an idiot. Like I've proven I don't belong here." I sat down across from him. "Can I tell you something? One mistake doesn't define you. Even a big mistake doesn't define you. I know that's hard to believe. How do you know?" I took a breath. This was a moment. I could deflect, change the subject, keep my past hidden, or I could be honest. Because I made a really big mistake once, years ago, at a different job. I was part of something unethical. It hurt people. And I spent 12 years believing that mistake was who I was, that I was fundamentally broken because of what I'd done. Alex looked surprised. "What changed?" "I finally stopped running from it, faced it, took responsibility for it. And I learned that acknowledging what you did wrong isn't the same as accepting that you're irredeemable. There's a difference. Did the people you hurt forgive you? Some did, some didn't. Some were still angry. But I realized I couldn't control their response. I could only control whether I faced it honestly or kept running from it. He was quiet for a moment. I've been so afraid of messing up. Like one mistake would prove I'm a fraud. But you're saying, what, that mistakes don't have to be catastrophic? I'm saying mistakes are human, and whether they define you depends on what you do with them. Do you learn from them? Do you take responsibility? Do you use them to become better? Or do you let them become shame that paralyzes you? Over the next few weeks, I noticed Alex seemed lighter, more confident. He still worked hard, but without that crushing fear of failure. And a few times he came to me with questions or concerns, saying, I trust you because you've been honest about your own struggles. At the Wednesday group, I shared about the conversation with Alex. I told him about my past, not all the details, but enough, and it helped him. My shame, the thing I'd hidden for 12 years, it became useful when I was honest about it. Marcus grinned. That's exactly how it works. When you stop hiding your shame, when you integrate it into your story instead of letting it be your secret, it becomes a tool to help others. Your mess becomes your message. Grace added, David, this is what redemption looks like. Not pretending the past didn't happen. Not being magically perfect now. But using what you've learned through your failure to help others. That's purpose in pain. A new person in the group, a man named Thomas, spoke up. I've been coming for 3 weeks now, and hearing stories like yours, people who did real things wrong, faced real consequences, and are still finding redemption, that's what gives me hope. Because I did something I'm deeply ashamed of, and I've been convinced I'm beyond help. But you're showing me that's not true. After the meeting, Thomas asked if we could talk. We sat in the church parking lot, and he told me his story. An addiction that had cost him his marriage, his job, custody of his kids. He'd been sober for 2 years, but still carried crushing shame about who he'd been. I don't know how to be someone who did those things, and also someone who deserves a future, he said. I'm still learning that myself. But here's what I'm discovering. You can acknowledge the harm you caused without letting that be your permanent identity. You did those things, that's true, but you're also someone who got sober, someone who's doing the work, someone who's taking responsibility. Both things are true, but how do you live with the guilt, the knowledge of what you did? I'm learning there's a difference between healthy guilt that leads to change and toxic shame that just paralyzes you. Guilt says, I did something wrong, and I need to make it right where I can and learn from it. Shame says, I am wrong, and nothing I do will ever be enough. God deals in the first one, not the second. In therapy with Dr. Chen, we talked about how my perspective had shifted. 6 weeks ago, you were convinced your shame had to stay secret, that if anyone really knew, they'd reject you, but you've told your Wednesday group, you've told Alex, you've told me, and what's happened? People have been understanding, supportive. It hasn't destroyed me, right? Because shame's power comes from hiding. When you bring it into the light, when you let people see you fully, including your failures, shame loses its grip. You discover you're acceptable even when you're not perfect. But I still carry it, the weight of what I did. It's not gone. It may never be fully gone, but it's different now, right? It's not crushing you. It's not defining you. You're carrying it differently. She was right. The shame was still there. I still felt it when I thought about those 12 years ago, but it had shifted from an identity, I am irredeemable, to a fact. I did something wrong that I deeply regret. That shift was subtle but profound. At work, Helen pulled me aside one day. I've noticed a change in you. You seem more present, more confident. What's been going on? I decided to be honest with her too. I told her about the Wednesday group, about learning to face shame instead of hiding from it, about making amends. That's brave, she said, and honestly, I think it's made you a better designer. You're taking more creative risks. You're more collaborative. It's like you're not holding back anymore. I think I've spent 12 years playing it safe because I believed I didn't deserve to thrive. I'm learning that's not true, or at least I'm trying to learn it. Well, keep learning, because whatever you're doing, it's working. That Sunday, Pastor Grace preached on the woman at the well from John 4, the woman with 5 failed marriages and a current relationship that was clearly shameful in her culture. And Jesus, instead of condemning her or avoiding her, talked to her, saw her, offered her living water. Notice Jesus didn't pretend she hadn't made those choices, Grace said. He acknowledged them, but he didn't let them be her defining characteristic. He saw past her shame to who she really was. And then he used her, a woman with a scandalous past, to bring the gospel to her whole town. Her past didn't disqualify her from purpose. It became part of her testimony. After the service, a woman I'd seen at church but never talked to approached me. "You shared your story at the Wednesday group a few weeks ago. I was there, but I didn't say anything then. I wanted to tell you, hearing you talk about shame, about making mistakes, about learning that it doesn't have to define you, it's helping me. I've been carrying shame about something for 8 years, and I've never told anyone. But listening to you made me think maybe I could. You should come back to the group," I said. "It's the most honest place I've ever been. People understand." "I think I will. Thank you for being willing to share your story. It matters more than you know." Her words stayed with me. My story, the thing I'd hidden for 12 years, the shame I'd been convinced would destroy me if anyone knew, it was helping people. Not because it was a perfect story of redemption, but because it was honest, because I wasn't pretending to have it all figured out. At the next Wednesday group, Grace taught about the concept of reframing our stories. Shame tells us one story. You're defined by your worst moment. You're irredeemable. You should hide. But God tells a different story. You're mine. You're loved. Your failures are part of your story, but they're not the whole story. I'm redeeming even your worst moments. Reframing doesn't mean pretending the bad stuff didn't happen. It means putting it in a bigger context. Yes, you failed. And also, you're learning. You're growing. You're becoming someone who knows how to handle failure with humility and honesty. That's valuable. She had us do an exercise. Write down the story shame tells you about your identity. Then write down the story God tells you about your identity. See the difference. I wrote, shame's story. You're a fraud. You hurt people and got away with it. You don't deserve good things. You should spend your life paying for what you did. You're fundamentally broken. God's story. You made serious mistakes. You hurt people, that's true. But you're also my child. You're loved. You're capable of growth and change. You're learning to take responsibility. You're using your experience to help others. You're being redeemed. Looking at them side by side, I saw how different they were. Shame's story ended with me. God's story kept going, kept growing, kept redeeming. Thomas, sitting next to me, looked at my paper. "Can I see yours?" I hesitated, then showed him. He nodded slowly. That helps, because I'm still stuck in shame's story. But seeing God's story written out, it makes it feel more possible that there could be a different way to see myself. After the meeting, several people approached me. Some wanted to share their own stories. Some just wanted to say they related to what I'd shared. One woman said, 6 months ago, I would have thought someone like you, someone who did what you did, didn't deserve forgiveness or a second chance. But being in this group, hearing your story, watching your journey, it's changed how I see people, including myself. If you can be redeemed, maybe I can too. Walking to my car that night, I felt overwhelmed with gratitude. 6 weeks ago, I'd been terrified to tell anyone the truth about my past. Now I'd told multiple people, and instead of rejection, I'd found acceptance. Instead of condemnation, I'd found community. At home, I wrote in my journal, 6 weeks ago, I was convinced my shame had to stay hidden, that if anyone really knew what I'd done, they'd see me as irredeemable. But I'm learning that's not true. I've told my Wednesday group, I've told Alex at work, I've told Helen, I've told Dr. Chen, I've told multiple people the truth about my past, and they haven't rejected me. They've been understanding, supportive, even grateful for my honesty. More surprising, my story is helping people. Alex is less paralyzed by fear of failure because I was honest about my own failure. Thomas has hope that he can be redeemed because he's watching me be redeemed. People I don't even know are finding freedom because I've stopped hiding my shame. I'm learning what Grace said is true. When you stop hiding your shame, it stops controlling you. And when you're honest about it, it becomes useful. Your mess becomes your message. I did something terrible 12 years ago, that's true. But I'm also someone who's learning to take responsibility, to face hard truths, to help others through honesty about my own struggles. Both things are true. God sees my shame. He's never pretended it wasn't there, but he refuses to let it define me. He says, yes, you failed, and also, you're mine, you're loved, you're being redeemed. Your story isn't over. I'm starting to believe that, starting to live like it might be true, and in that believing, in that living, I'm finding freedom I never thought possible. 6 weeks in, and I was different, not perfect, not finished, but no longer hiding, no longer defined solely by my worst mistake, learning to live as someone who'd failed and someone who was being redeemed. Both things were true, and somehow that made all the difference. 2 months into learning that my shame didn't define me, I faced the biggest test yet. My past showed up in my present in a way I'd never anticipated. It started with an email from our firm's new client liaison. We'd been pitching a major account, a financial services company looking to rebrand. If we landed it, it would be the biggest project our firm had handled, and I was lead designer on the pitch. The email was routine. David, heads up that one of the client's executives will be sitting in on Thursday's presentation. His name is Marcus Chen. He'll be evaluating our creative approach. I stared at the name. Marcus Chen. It couldn't be the same person, but I looked him up on LinkedIn, and my stomach dropped. It was him, Marcus Chen, who'd been a senior analyst at the company I'd worked for 12 years ago, who'd been let go in the aftermath of the fraud investigation, whose career had been damaged by what happened. He was going to be in the room while I presented. He was going to see me, recognize me, and he'd have every reason to tell my boss, my colleagues, the client, everyone, exactly who I was and what I'd done. For the first time in 2 months, I felt the old crushing weight of shame return full force. All the progress I'd made, all the healing, all the freedom I'd been finding, it felt like it could disappear in an instant. I called Grace immediately. My past just caught up with me. Someone from that job 12 years ago is going to be at a major presentation. He's going to recognize me. He's going to know what I did, and he could destroy everything I've built here. Okay, take a breath. Tell me what's happening. I explained the situation, the presentation, Marcus Chen, the stakes, the terror that my past was about to explode into my present. David, what are you most afraid of? That he'll tell everyone, that I'll lose my job. That all the people who've trusted me, Helen, Alex, my colleagues, will find out what I did and realize I'm not who they thought I was. But you've been working on believing you're not defined by what you did. Has that changed? I thought I believed it. But now that it's real, now that there are actual consequences, I don't know. Maybe I was fooling myself. Maybe I am still just that person who did that thing. Or maybe this is a test. Maybe this is your opportunity to practice what you've been learning, that you can acknowledge your past without letting it destroy your present. After we hung up, I sat with her words. A test, an opportunity. It didn't feel like either. It felt like a nightmare. At therapy the next day, Dr. Chen asked, "What's the worst-case scenario?" He tells everyone, "I lose my job. My reputation here is destroyed. Everyone knows I'm a fraud. And if that happens, then what? Then I start over again. Again, like I've been doing for 12 years. Or you could choose differently this time. Instead of running, instead of hiding, what if you faced it head on? How? What if you reached out to Marcus Chen before the presentation? What if you acknowledged your shared history, took responsibility and gave him the choice of how to respond? The suggestion terrified me. That would be voluntarily exposing myself, giving him ammunition, or it would be taking control of your own story, not letting shame control you through fear of exposure. You've been working on facing your shame. This is your chance to prove to yourself that you really have changed. I spent the rest of the day wrestling with the idea. Reach out to Marcus Chen. Face him directly. Take responsibility before he had a chance to expose me. At the Wednesday group, I shared about the situation. The room went quiet. Everyone understood the stakes. Thomas spoke first. I had something similar happen. Someone from my using days showed up at my AA meeting. I was terrified he'd tell everyone there about the things I'd done when I was using, but I approached him first, owned it, apologized, and you know what? He respected that. We're friends now. Carla added, "The thing about shame is that it makes us afraid of being known, but you've been practicing being known, honestly, fully known, for 2 months now. This is just another version of that practice." Marcus, our group's Marcus, not Marcus Chen, smiled. "I think Dr. Chen is right. You have a choice. Run and hide like you've done before, or face it and prove to yourself you really have changed." That night, I drafted an email to Marcus Chen. It took me hours. I rewrote it a dozen times. Finally, I had something that felt honest. "Marcus, I saw your name on the attendee list for Thursday's presentation, and I felt I should reach out before the meeting. I don't know if you remember me, but we worked together 12 years ago at Company Name. I was part of what happened there, part of the fraud, part of the reason you and others lost your jobs. I was young and scared, and I followed orders I knew were wrong. When everything fell apart, I left quietly and never took responsibility for my role in it. I've spent 12 years carrying shame about what I did, and 2 months ago, I finally started facing it. I've made amends where I could. I've taken responsibility. I'm working with a therapist and a faith community to learn how to acknowledge my failures without letting them define me entirely. I'm telling you this because I don't want to hide from you on Thursday. You have every right to be angry with me. You have every right to tell my colleagues and the client about my past. I can't control that. But I wanted to face you directly and take responsibility rather than hoping you wouldn't recognize me. I'm sorry for my part in what happened. I'm sorry for the impact it had on your career. I can't undo it, but I want you to know I take full responsibility for it. If you'd prefer I remove myself from the Thursday presentation, I will. That's your choice. David. I sat with the drafted email for an hour. This was it. I could send it and potentially lose everything, or I could delete it and hope he didn't recognize me. But I thought about everything I'd learned over the past 2 months, about facing shame instead of running from it, about taking responsibility, about believing I could acknowledge my past without being destroyed by it. I pressed send. Then I barely slept. The next morning, Marcus Chen responded, "David, I remember you. I remember what happened. I've spent years working through the anger and bitterness about that time in my life. It derailed my career for a while, though I've rebuilt since then. I appreciate you reaching out. Most people wouldn't. Most people would just hope I didn't recognize them and would hide if I did. I'm not going to tell your colleagues or the client about your past. That's not my story to tell, and frankly, it would reflect poorly on me if I did. What you did 12 years ago isn't relevant to whether your firm can handle our rebranding, but I want you to know I'm still processing what happened. Your apology helps, but it doesn't erase the impact. I lost 2 years of career progression. I had to explain in interviews why I'd left that company. It was brutal. That said, I respect that you're trying to take responsibility now. Better late than never, I suppose. I'll see you Thursday. Let's just focus on the presentation. Marcus. I read the email 3 times, relief and gratitude washing over me. He wasn't going to expose me. He was giving me a chance to do my job. But more than that, I'd faced him. I'd taken responsibility. I hadn't run. At work, I pulled Helen aside and told her everything about my past, about Marcus Chen being at the presentation, about reaching out to him. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because I'm done hiding. Because if Marcus changes his mind and decides to tell you, I want you to hear it from me first. And because I've learned that shame loses its power when you drag it into the light." Helen was quiet for a long moment. "That took courage, real courage. And honestly, it makes me trust you more, not less, because I'm seeing someone who made mistakes and is taking responsibility for them. That's integrity." Thursday came. I walked into the conference room where Marcus Chen was already seated with the other client representatives. Our eyes met. He gave a small nod of acknowledgement. Not friendly exactly, but not hostile either. I presented our creative approach, walked through the mock-ups, the brand strategy, the implementation timeline. And I was good, because I wasn't hiding. I wasn't performing from a place of shame. I was just doing my job. After the presentation, as everyone was leaving, Marcus approached me. "That was solid work," he said. "Really solid. Thank you. I meant what I said in my email. What you did 12 years ago, I'm still processing it. But I respect that you faced me directly. That takes guts. I couldn't keep running. I've done that long enough." He studied me for a moment. "You seem different than you were back then. More honest, I guess. Less afraid. I'm learning to be. It's a process." He nodded. "Good luck with that process. And with the pitch. I think you might actually get this account." After he left, I sat in the empty conference room, overwhelmed with relief and something else. Pride, maybe. Not in having gotten away with something, but in having faced it. I'd been terrified of this moment for 2 months, and I'd walked through it with honesty instead of hiding. That evening at the Wednesday group, I shared the whole story. The email, Marcus Chen's response, the presentation, the conversation afterward. "I was convinced this would destroy me," I said. "That my past catching up with me would end everything I'd built here. But it didn't, because I faced it instead of hiding from it." Grace smiled. "David, do you see what just happened? You proved to yourself that your shame doesn't have to control you, that you can face your past honestly and survive it. That's huge." Thomas nodded vigorously. "This gives me so much hope, because I've been terrified of someone from my using days, showing up and exposing me. But you just showed me I could handle that. I could face it directly instead of running." Later that week, our firm got the call. We'd won the account. Marcus Chen had specifically commented on the creative vision and the professionalism of our team. When Helen told me, she added, "He mentioned you specifically, said you seemed like someone with integrity. I think your honesty with him paid off. Or it just didn't destroy me like I thought it would." Same thing, isn't it? In therapy, Dr. Chen asked me to reflect on what I'd learned from the experience. I learned that facing my past doesn't destroy me. That taking responsibility, even when it's terrifying, actually frees me. That hiding from shame gives it more power than facing it ever could. And what does this tell you about your identity? About who you are? That I'm not just the person who made that mistake 12 years ago. I'm also the person who's learning to face it honestly, who's taking responsibility, who's becoming someone different than I was. Can you say that more clearly? Who are you? I thought about it. I'm someone who made serious mistakes, and I'm someone who's learning to take responsibility for them. Both things are true. And the second thing is becoming more important than the first. She smiled. That's growth, David. Real growth. That night, I wrote in my journal, 2 months ago, I heard words that started changing my life. I see your shame, but it doesn't define you. This week, I put those words to the ultimate test. My past showed up in my present, in a way I'd always feared. And I had a choice, run and hide like I've always done, or face it honestly. I chose to face it. I reached out to Marcus Chen. I took responsibility. I told Helen the truth. I presented with honesty instead of fear. And I survived. More than survived. I grew. I proved to myself that I really have changed, that facing shame is better than hiding from it, that taking responsibility is freeing, not destroying. Marcus Chen isn't my friend. He's still processing what happened, and he has every right to his anger, but he respected my honesty. He gave me a chance to do my job, and we landed the account. More importantly, I faced the thing I'd been most afraid of, being exposed, being known for my worst mistake, and I didn't fall apart, because I've been practicing being known honestly for 2 months now. This was just a bigger version of that practice. I see your shame, but it doesn't define you. God was right. My shame is real. My past really happened, but it doesn't get to be my entire identity. I'm someone who failed and someone who's being redeemed. Both things are true. And today, I proved that to myself in a way I couldn't have 2 months ago. I faced my shame, and it didn't destroy me. That's freedom. 2 months in, and I'd passed the test I'd been most afraid of. Not perfectly, not without fear, but honestly. And that made all the difference. 3 months into learning that my shame didn't define me, I discovered that redemption wasn't just personal. It was meant to be shared. The week after the presentation with Marcus Chen, something shifted in me. I'd faced my biggest fear, being exposed, and survived it. More than survived it. I'd grown through it. And that experience gave me a new kind of freedom I hadn't felt before. At work, Alex approached me one morning. "David, can I talk to you about something personal?" We grabbed coffee, and he told me about a mistake he'd made in college. He'd cheated on an important exam, never got caught, but had carried guilt about it ever since. "I got into grad school partially because of that grade. My whole career is built on something dishonest, and I don't know what to do with that." I recognized his struggle immediately. "Are you asking me what you should do, or are you asking me how to live with it?" "Both, I guess. I can't tell you what to do about the specific situation, but I can tell you that carrying it in secret will eat you alive. Shame thrives in hiding. Whatever you decide to do, whether that's coming clean, making amends somehow, or accepting that you can't change the past but can live differently now, you need to stop carrying it alone. Did you come clean about everything you did? I made amends where I could, reached out to people I'd hurt, took responsibility. Some forgave me, some didn't. But the point wasn't getting their forgiveness. It was stopping the hiding, dragging my shame into the light so it couldn't control me anymore. I'm scared if I tell anyone, they'll see me differently, think less of me. They might, but you know what's worse? Living your whole life afraid of being known. Keeping everyone at arm's length because you're terrified they'll discover who you really are. That's not living. That's just existing while hiding. Over the next few weeks, Alex worked through his situation with a therapist. He decided not to come clean formally. Too much time had passed. It would affect too many people, but he committed to living with integrity moving forward. And he thanked me for being honest about my own struggle. "You made it okay to not be perfect," he said. "You showed me I could acknowledge my failures and still be a good person." The Wednesday group continued to grow. We now had 12 regular attendees, with new people joining frequently, and Pastor Grace asked if I'd be willing to co-facilitate, to help lead discussions and support newcomers. "You've done the work, David. You've faced your shame, taken responsibility, learned to integrate your past into your story without letting it define you. That makes you qualified to help others do the same." I don't feel qualified. I still struggle. I still have days where the shame feels heavy. That's exactly why you're qualified. You're not standing above people saying, "I figured it out." You're walking alongside them saying, "I'm learning too." That's what people need. Co-facilitating meant being even more vulnerable, more visible with my story. Every week I'd share pieces of my journey, the mistakes I'd made, the amends I'd tried, the times I'd failed to forgive myself, the slow process of learning to receive grace. And every week, people responded. New attendees would say, "Hearing your story gave me courage to come." Longtime members would say, "Watching your growth helps me believe change is possible." One evening, a woman named Sarah shared that she'd been molested by a family member as a teenager and carried shame about it for 20 years. not shame for what she'd done, but toxic shame for what had been done to her. She'd internalized the abuse as proof that she was worthless, damaged, unlovable. After the meeting, she approached me. "I know your shame is about something you did, and mine is about something done to me. But hearing you talk about how shame doesn't define you, it's helping me see that what happened to me doesn't define me either." Her words reminded me that shame wore many faces. Sometimes it came from our own failures. Sometimes it was inflicted on us by others' cruelty. But either way, it tried to convince us we were irredeemable. And either way, God's response was the same. "I see it, but it doesn't define you." At my next therapy session, Dr. Chen observed, "You seem different, lighter. What's changed?" I think I'm finally starting to believe what God said, that my shame doesn't define me, not just intellectually, but actually believing it, living like it's true. What's making the difference? I faced Marcus Chen. I survived being exposed, and I'm watching other people find freedom by being honest about their struggles. It's reinforcing that this is real, that redemption is possible, that shame really does lose its power when you drag it into the light. And when the shame tries to resurface, because it will, it does. Some days I still feel like that person who did that thing 12 years ago. But now I have tools, I have community, I have a different story to tell myself. I can acknowledge the shame without being controlled by it. That Sunday, Pastor Grace preached on 2 Corinthians 5:17. "If anyone is in Christ, the new creation has come, the old has gone, the new is here." Some of you are stuck in the old, she said. You've let your past define you so completely that you can't see the new God is creating. You're looking backward instead of forward. But God doesn't define you by your worst moment. He defines you by His love, by His grace, by what He's making you into. After the service, a man probably in his 60s approached me. "I heard you share at the Wednesday group last week about making amends even when people might not forgive you. I need to do that. I have adult children who won't speak to me because of how I was as a father. I was angry, harsh, sometimes abusive, and I've been too ashamed to reach out to them. But you inspired me. If you can face your past, maybe I can face mine." His words humbled me. My story, messy and imperfect as it was giving other people courage. That felt like redemption in action. At work, Helen called me into her office. "David, I wanted to tell you something. The account we landed, Marcus Chen specifically mentioned you in their feedback. He said you demonstrated integrity and professionalism. He doesn't know I know your history with him, but I do, and I'm proud of how you handled that situation." "Thank you. It was terrifying." "I'm sure it was. But you didn't let fear control you. You faced it honestly. That's the mark of real character." She paused. "I'm also telling you this because we're promoting you. Senior designer with the potential to move into creative director in the next year or two. You've earned it, not despite your past, but because of how you've chosen to face it and grow from it." The promotion felt surreal. 3 months ago, I'd been convinced my past disqualified me from success. Now I was being promoted specifically because of the character I'd developed through facing that past. At the Wednesday group, I shared about the promotion. Thomas grinned. "See, God doesn't waste our pain. He redeems it, uses it to make us into people of depth and character. Your shame taught you humility, honesty, compassion. Those are leadership qualities." Our Marcus added, "I've been watching you grow for 3 months now. You've gone from someone carrying secret shame to someone helping others face their shame. That's not just personal healing, that's ministry, that's purpose." One evening, a young man named Jordan joined the group for the first time. He was maybe 23, barely holding it together, clearly carrying enormous weight. When it was his turn to share, he broke down. "I did something terrible. Really terrible, and I don't know if I can live with it. I don't know if I deserve to live with it." After the meeting, I asked if I could talk with him privately. We sat in the parking lot, and he told me his story, a car accident caused by his drunk driving. The other driver had been seriously injured. Jordan had been convicted, served time, but couldn't forgive himself. "I destroyed someone's life," he said. "How do I come back from that?" I don't know if you ever fully come back from something like that, but I know you can learn to live as someone who did something terrible and someone who's taking responsibility for it. Both things can be true, but I deserve to feel this shame. I deserve to suffer for what I did. Maybe. But there's a difference between appropriate consequences and lifelong self-punishment. You've served your legal sentence. You're in this group trying to face it honestly. The question isn't whether you deserve to suffer. It's whether ongoing suffering actually helps anyone, including the person you hurt. What helped you? Making amends where I could, taking responsibility honestly, stopping the hiding, building a community of people who know my worst and still choose to support me. And slowly, very slowly, learning to receive the grace God offers, even when I don't feel like I deserve it. Jordan came back every week after that, and I watched him start the same journey I'd been on, learning that acknowledging your failure isn't the same as being defined by it, learning that shame loses power when you face it honestly, learning that redemption is possible even for real, serious failures. One Sunday, the church did a baptism service. Several people from our Wednesday group were getting baptized, including Thomas. As part of the service, each person shared briefly about what baptism meant to them. Thomas said, "For me, baptism is about declaring that my past doesn't define my future. I did things I'm deeply ashamed of, hurt people I love, but God says I'm a new creation, and I'm choosing to believe that's true." Watching him go under the water and come back up, I felt tears on my face. He was living out what we'd all been learning, that shame doesn't get the last word, that God's declaration of our identity is stronger than our worst moments. After the service, Grace asked if I'd ever considered being baptized. "I was baptized as a kid," I said, "but that was before everything, before I really understood what I was declaring." Would it mean something different now, after this journey? I thought about it. Yeah, it would. Because now I'd be saying, I know who I was. I know what I did, and I'm declaring that God's definition of me is more true than my shame's definition of me. Then maybe you should consider it. That week, I talked to Dr. Chen about the idea. What would baptism represent for you? A public declaration that I'm not hiding anymore, that I'm someone who's been redeemed, that my identity is in Christ, not in my failures. That sounds significant and terrifying. It is, because it means stepping fully into this new identity. Not just privately working on it, but publicly declaring it. Are you ready for that? I thought about the past 3 months, facing my shame, making amends, helping others, surviving being exposed, learning to receive grace. Yeah, I think I am. At the next Wednesday group, I shared that I was planning to be baptized. Jordan, the young man from the car accident, looked at me with tears in his eyes. If you can do that, if you can publicly declare that God has redeemed you after what you did, then maybe there's hope for me too. That's exactly why I'm doing it, I said. Not because I've figured everything out, or because I'm perfect now, but because I want to declare publicly that my shame doesn't define me, that God's love is bigger than my failures, and I want that declaration to give other people hope. Ojishi. In my journal that night, I wrote, 3 months ago I was terrified of anyone knowing my past. Now I'm planning to stand in front of my church and declare publicly that I've been redeemed from it. That's not because the shame is gone. It's not because what I did doesn't matter. It's because I've learned that God's declaration of my identity is more powerful than my shame's declaration. I did something terrible 12 years ago. That's true. But I'm also God's child. I'm loved. I'm being redeemed. I'm learning to take responsibility. I'm helping others face their shame. I'm becoming someone different than I was. Both stories are true, but God's story gets to be louder than shame's story. I see your shame, but it doesn't define you. I'm living that now, not perfectly, not without struggle, but really. And that's changing everything, not just for me, but for everyone watching my journey. That's what redemption looks like: messy, public, vulnerable, real, and absolutely worth it. 3 months in, and I was preparing to make the most public declaration of my life. Not that I was perfect, but that I was redeemed. Not that I didn't have a past, but that my past didn't have to be my future. And in that declaration, I'd be offering hope to everyone else carrying shame. You can be redeemed too. 4 months into learning that my shame didn't define me, I stood waist-deep in water, preparing to make the most public declaration of my life. The baptism service was scheduled for a Sunday morning. About 300 people would be there, and I'd be standing in front of all of them, sharing my story before going under the water. The week leading up to it, the shame tried to come back with a vengeance. Old voices in my head: "Who are you to stand up there? You hurt people. You don't deserve this. You're making a mockery of baptism. You should stay hidden." At Wednesday group, I shared about the voices. The closer I get to baptism, the louder the shame gets, like it's making one last attempt to keep me hidden. Grace nodded. That's exactly what's happening. Shame's power is in secrecy. You're about to make the most public statement possible that shame doesn't control you anymore. Of course it's fighting back. Jordan, who'd been coming for a month now, said, "What you're doing, it's giving me courage. If you can stand in front of everyone and declare you've been redeemed, maybe someday I can too. That's why I have to do it. Not just for me, but for everyone who's watching. Everyone who thinks their shame is too big for redemption." Marcus, our group's Marcus, added, "I was baptized 6 months into my journey, and it was the most terrifying and freeing thing I'd ever done, because I was saying publicly, this is who I am now, not who I was, who I am now." The morning of the baptism, I woke up with my heart pounding. I'd written out what I wanted to say, but I was terrified. Not of the water, of the vulnerability, of standing in front of everyone and saying, "I'm someone who did something terrible, and I'm declaring that God has redeemed me." At the church, I waited backstage with 3 others being baptized. One was Thomas from our group. One was a teenager who'd grown up in the church. One was an elderly woman who'd just recently come to faith. Pastor Grace gathered us together. Remember, baptism isn't a declaration that you're perfect. It's a declaration that you're God's, that He's making you new, that your identity is in Him, not in your past. When it was my turn, I walked out onto the stage. The baptismal pool was set up at the front of the sanctuary, 300 faces looking at me. I saw Alex from work, Helen, members of the Wednesday group, people I'd never met. I took a breath and began. "My name is David. 4 months ago I came to this church, carrying a weight I'd been hiding for 12 years. I'd done something I was deeply ashamed of, something that hurt people, and I'd convinced myself that if anyone really knew what I'd done, they'd see me as irredeemable. But I heard words that challenged that belief. I see your shame, but it doesn't define you. And over these past 4 months, I've been learning what that means. I've faced what I did. I've made amends where I could. I've stopped hiding from the people I hurt. I've learned that shame loses its power when you drag it into the light. And I've discovered that God's definition of me, loved, His, redeemable, is more true than shame's definition of me, broken, beyond repair, permanently stained. Today I'm being baptized not because I've figured everything out, not because I don't still struggle with shame sometimes, but because I'm declaring publicly that my identity is in Christ, not in my failures, that I'm a new creation, that the old is gone and the new has come. If you're here carrying shame about something you did or something done to you, I want you to know redemption is possible. You don't have to stay hidden. You don't have to let shame define you. God sees it, and He says it doesn't have the final word about who you are. I stepped into the baptismal pool. Pastor Grace stood with me in the water. "David, because of your profession of faith in Jesus Christ, I baptize you in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit." She lowered me backward into the water. For a moment, I was completely submerged, and when I came back up, I felt something break. Not the shame itself, that would be a longer process, but shame's control over me, its power to keep me hidden. I came up out of the water, and the congregation cheered. And I saw faces I recognized. Alex crying, Jordan crying, Thomas cheering, Grace smiling with tears in her eyes. After the service, at least 20 people approached me. Some wanted to thank me for my honesty. Some wanted to share their own struggles with shame. Some just wanted to say they were proud of me. One man, probably in his 50s, pulled me aside. I've been coming to this church for 5 years, and I've been carrying shame about something I did 20 years ago. I've never told anyone, but hearing you today, I think I'm ready to stop hiding. Can you tell me about that Wednesday group? That evening, I sat in my apartment still processing the day. I'd done it. I'd stood in front of hundreds of people and declared my shame publicly, and I'd survived it. More than survived it, I'd felt free. But the next week brought a new challenge. I got an email from Jennifer, the former co-worker I'd reached out to months ago, the one who'd been angry in her response. The email was unexpected. David, I've been thinking about your apology a lot. I was angry when you first reached out. I'm still processing that anger. But I wanted to tell you something. I saw a video someone posted of your baptism. Someone from your church must have shared it on social media, and I watched you talk about shame and redemption and taking responsibility. I don't forgive you. I'm not there yet. But I respect what you're doing. I respect that you're not hiding anymore. And I wanted to tell you, keep doing what you're doing. Keep being honest. Keep helping people. Because even though I'm still hurt by what happened, I can see you're becoming someone different than you were. That matters. It doesn't erase the past, but it matters. Jennifer. I read the email multiple times, tears streaming down my face. Not forgiveness, but acknowledgement, recognition that I'd changed. That was more than I'd dared to hope for. At the Wednesday group, which had grown to 15 regular attendees, I shared about the baptism and Jennifer's email. I think I've been operating under this assumption that redemption meant everyone forgiving me, that if people were still angry or hurt, it meant I wasn't really redeemed. But Jennifer's email taught me something. Redemption doesn't require everyone's approval or forgiveness. It's about becoming someone different, regardless of whether everyone recognizes or accepts that change. Carla nodded. I've been learning the same thing. Some people from my past will never forgive me for my affair, and I had to accept that their unforgiveness doesn't invalidate my redemption. I can't control their response. I can only control whether I keep growing. A new attendee, a woman named Michelle, spoke up. I'm struggling with this. I did something that hurt my sister deeply. I've apologized, tried to make amends. But she wants nothing to do with me, and I keep thinking, if she can't forgive me, how can I forgive myself? How can I move forward? You move forward by accepting that her forgiveness and your redemption are separate things, I said. I'd love for everyone I hurt to forgive me, but some won't. Some can't, and I have to be okay with that. Because my identity isn't based on whether they forgive me. It's based on God's love for me and my willingness to keep growing. Over the next few weeks, something interesting happened. The baptism video that someone had posted, it went viral, at least within Christian social media circles. Thousands of people watched it, and I started receiving messages from strangers. Some were encouraging. Your story gave me courage to face my own shame. Some were critical. How dare you act like you deserve baptism after what you did? Some were curious. Can you really be redeemed from something like that? I showed the messages to Dr. Chen in therapy. I don't know what to do with all this attention. Part of me wants to defend myself. Part of me wants to hide again. What would be a healthy middle ground? Maybe responding to some with honesty, but not feeling like I have to justify my redemption to everyone. Not everyone will understand or accept my story, and that's okay. That's mature wisdom, David. You can share your story without requiring everyone to approve of it. At work, the viral video had reached some of my colleagues. A few approached me to say they'd seen it. Some were supportive. One, a designer named Brad, who I'd never been close with, was skeptical. So you did something unethical and now you're getting baptized and everything's fine. Seems convenient. His words stung, but I thought about what I'd learned. Baptism doesn't mean everything's fine. It means I'm not hiding anymore. It means I've taken responsibility, and I'm choosing to believe God can redeem even serious failures. Not everyone has to agree with that choice. But what about the people you hurt? Do they get to just move on because you got baptized? No, they get to feel however they feel. Some are still angry. Some have moved on. Some have forgiven me. Some haven't. I can't control their responses. I can only control whether I keep growing or stay stuck in shame. He walked away still skeptical, and I had to be okay with that. Not everyone would understand. Not everyone would accept my story. And their skepticism didn't invalidate my redemption. At Sunday service, Pastor Grace preached on Philippians 3:13-14. Forgetting what is behind and straining toward what is ahead, I press on toward the goal. Notice Paul doesn't say, pretending the past didn't happen, she said. He says, forgetting what is behind. That doesn't mean amnesia. It means not being defined by it, not letting it control your present and future. You acknowledge the past, you learn from it, and then you press forward toward what God is calling you to become. After the service, Jordan approached me. I've decided to get baptized too, next month. You showed me it's possible to declare publicly that you're being redeemed even when you don't feel like you deserve it. That's huge, Jordan. I'm proud of you. I'm terrified, but I'm tired of hiding. Tired of letting my shame control me. You proved it's possible to face it and survive. That week, Alex from work told me he'd been inspired by my baptism to start attending a church near his apartment. I need community like what you have, people who know my struggles and still support me. Helen commented that the whole office seemed to respect me more after the baptism, even those who weren't religious. You showed real courage. That matters to people, regardless of their beliefs. 4 months in, and I'd made the most public declaration of my life. Not everyone understood it. Not everyone accepted it. Some people were still angry. Some people thought I was taking the easy way out. Some people thought redemption was too convenient. But I'd done it. I'd stood in front of everyone and said, I'm not hiding anymore. Shame doesn't define me. God does. And that declaration had freed not just me, but others watching. Jordan was getting baptized. Alex was finding community. Strangers were reaching out saying my story gave them hope. That night, I updated my journal. 4 months ago, I was terrified of anyone knowing my shame. Today, thousands of people know my story because someone posted my baptism online. Not everyone responds with grace. Some people think I don't deserve redemption. Some think baptism is too easy, that I should suffer more. Some are skeptical that real change is possible. And you know what? I can't control their responses. Jennifer is still processing her hurt. That's her right. Brad is skeptical. That's his prerogative. Random strangers on the internet have opinions about my redemption. They're entitled to them. But their responses don't determine my identity. God's declaration does. And he says, I see your shame, but it doesn't define you. You're mine. You're loved. You're being made new. I did something terrible 12 years ago, that's true. But I'm also someone who's faced it, taken responsibility, stopped hiding, and is being redeemed. Both things are true. And today, I declared publicly which story I'm choosing to believe. Not the story shame tells, the story God tells. That's freedom. Messy, imperfect, vulnerable freedom, and it's worth everything. 4 months in, and I'd crossed a threshold. I was no longer someone secretly carrying shame. I was someone publicly declaring redemption. And that made all the difference. Not just for me, but for everyone watching who needed to know redemption was possible for them too. 5 months into learning that my shame didn't define me, I learned a crucial lesson. Healing isn't linear, and sometimes old wounds reopen in unexpected ways. It started with a LinkedIn message, someone I didn't recognize at first. David, this is Robert Chen's son, Marcus Chen Jr. My father passed away last week, heart attack. He was only 62. I stared at the message in shock. Robert, my old boss, the one I'd emailed to make amends, was dead. The message continued. Dad mentioned you in the last year. Said you'd reached out to take responsibility for what happened at the old company. He respected that. I thought you'd want to know. I sat at my desk, unable to move. Robert was dead, and suddenly, all the progress I'd made felt fragile. Had my apology mattered? Had it helped him at all? Or had he spent his last years still carrying bitterness about what happened? At the Wednesday group, I shared about Robert's death. I thought I'd made peace with it. Thought I'd taken responsibility and could move forward. But now he's gone, and I'll never know if my apology really mattered, if he ever really forgave me. And I'm realizing I was still hoping for that, still wanting absolution. Grace spoke gently. David, Robert's death doesn't undo the growth you've experienced. It doesn't invalidate your redemption, but it does highlight something important. We can't base our healing on whether the people we hurt eventually forgive us, because sometimes that resolution never comes. Thomas added, when my ex-wife died 2 years ago, I hadn't spoken to her in 5 years. She'd refused all my attempts at apology, at making amends, and when she died, I had to accept that I'd never get closure from her. I had to find closure within myself and with God. His words helped, but I still felt shaken. That week the shame came back harder than it had in months. All the old thoughts. You don't deserve peace. You don't deserve redemption. Robert died without forgiving you, and that's what you deserve. In therapy, Dr. Chen asked, what's underneath the shame that's resurfaced? I think I've been operating under this assumption that if I did enough, made enough amends, helped enough people, grew enough, eventually everyone I hurt would see that I'd changed and forgive me. Robert's death took away that possibility, and it's forcing me to confront whether my redemption is real if not everyone acknowledges it. Is your redemption contingent on their acknowledgement? It shouldn't be, but apparently part of me still thinks it is. What would it mean to accept that Robert died without offering you the closure you wanted? I thought about it. It would mean accepting that redemption is between me and God, that I can't earn it by getting enough people to forgive me, that some questions will never be answered, and I have to be okay with that. The next week was brutal. I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus at work. The old patterns of shame wanted to come back full force. And I caught myself withdrawing from Alex, from Helen, from the Wednesday group, the old instinct to hide when things got hard. But this time, I recognized what I was doing, and I forced myself to reach out instead of retreating. I called Grace. I'm struggling. Robert's death triggered something. I'm falling back into old patterns of shame and hiding. Come to the church. Right now. Let's talk. I met her in her office, and I broke down. I thought I'd healed. Thought I'd moved past this. But one thing happens, and I'm right back where I started. Maybe I was fooling myself. Maybe I haven't really changed. David, listen to me. You're not back where you started. 5 months ago, you would have hidden this struggle. You would have retreated into shame alone. But you called me. You reached out. That's growth. That's real change. But the shame is just as heavy as it was before. The shame might feel heavy again, but you're carrying it differently. You have tools now. You have community. You have 5 months of evidence that you can face hard things and survive them. This is a setback, not a reset. Her words helped, but the next few days were still hard. At the Wednesday group, I was honest about struggling, about Robert's death triggering old shame, about wanting to hide but forcing myself to stay connected. Jordan spoke up. Hearing you struggle actually helps me, because I've been putting you on a pedestal, thinking you figured it all out. But you're human. You still struggle, and seeing you push through the struggle instead of giving up, that's what gives me hope. Alex, who'd started coming to the group occasionally, added, when you're honest about still struggling, it makes the healing feel more real, not like some magical transformation, but like actual work that has hard days and better days. Over the next 2 weeks, I practiced everything I'd learned. I went to therapy twice a week instead of once. I called members of the Wednesday group when the shame felt overwhelming. I journaled extensively. I forced myself to keep showing up at work even when I wanted to hide. I prayed desperate, honest prayers about feeling like I'd lost my footing. and slowly, gradually, the acute pain began to subside, not disappearing, but becoming manageable again. At my next therapy session, Dr. Chen said, "I want you to notice something. You had a major setback. Robert's death triggered significant shame, and you handled it completely differently than you would have 5 months ago. You reached out immediately. You stayed connected to community. You used your tools. You didn't run. But I felt like I was back at square one. You felt that way, but objectively, you weren't. Your response to the crisis proved that. The shame might have felt as heavy, but you carried it with 5 months of growth and community supporting you. That's different." She was right. I'd had a setback, but I'd handled it with tools and community I didn't have before. That was significant. The following Sunday, Pastor Grace preached on Hebrews 12:1. "Let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us." Notice it says, "throw off," she said. Not throw off once, but continuously throw off. Because the weights we carry, shame, guilt, past failures, they have a way of climbing back on. And we have to keep throwing them off, over and over. That's not failure. That's the practice of faith. After the service, Marcus Chen Jr., Robert's son, was there. He'd driven down from another city specifically to talk to me. "My father asked me to give you something," he said, handing me an envelope. "He wrote this a few weeks before he died. I think he knew his health was declining." With shaking hands, I opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter. "David, I don't know if I'll get a chance to send this, but I wanted you to know your apology mattered, not because it erased what happened or made it okay, but because it showed character. Most people never take responsibility. They just move on and hope everyone forgets. I've spent years angry about what happened at that company, angry at you, at others, at myself, but your reaching out forced me to confront my own role in it. I created a culture where that kind of behavior happened. I was the one in charge. I don't think I ever told you this directly, but I forgive you, not because what you did was okay, but because holding on to anger was poisoning me, and because I could see you were genuinely trying to take responsibility and change. I hope you found peace with your past. You deserve that. We all do. Robert Chen. I read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face. He'd forgiven me. Before he died, he'd forgiven me, and he'd written it down, made sure his son would give it to me. "Thank you," I managed to say to Marcus Jr. I can't tell you what this means. Dad changed in the last year, became less angry, more at peace. I think your reaching out was part of that. You gave him permission to let go of his own guilt about his role in what happened. So thank you for that. At the Wednesday group that evening, I shared the letter. The whole room was silent as I read it out loud. When I finished, several people were crying. "God's timing," Grace said quietly. "You needed to learn that your redemption wasn't contingent on Robert's forgiveness. And then, once you'd learned that lesson, God gave you the gift of knowing he'd forgiven you anyway." Thomas nodded. "That's grace. You didn't get it when you thought you needed it to be redeemed. You got it after you'd learned you didn't need it. That's how God works." That night, I wrote in my journal, 5 months ago I heard words that began changing my life. I see your shame, but it doesn't define you. This month, I learned that lesson deeper than ever. Robert died, and I spiraled, fell back into shame, felt like all my progress was fake, but I didn't stay there. I reached out, I used my tools, I stayed connected to community, I pushed through instead of running. And then, when I'd already learned the lesson that my redemption wasn't contingent on his forgiveness, he gave me forgiveness anyway, in a letter written before he died, a gift I didn't know I'd receive. I'm learning that healing isn't linear, that setbacks are part of the process, not evidence of failure, that the same wounds can reopen, and that's okay. What matters is how you respond when they do. I'm also learning that God's timing is different from mine. I wanted Robert's forgiveness to validate my redemption, but God had me learn first that my redemption was real, with or without that validation. And then he gave me the gift of it anyway. I did something terrible 12 years ago. Robert forgave me for it before he died. Both things are true, and I'm learning to hold both truths with gratitude and humility. Shame still tries to come back, probably always will, but now I have 5 months of evidence that I can face it when it does. That I don't have to run, that community and tools and God's grace are stronger than my shame. That's freedom, not the absence of struggle, but the presence of resources to handle the struggle. Not the end of shame, but the refusal to let shame have the final word. I see your shame, but it doesn't define you. It's truer than ever, because I've now faced the shame coming back, and it didn't destroy me, didn't undo my growth, just challenged me to practice what I'd learned. And I did. Imperfectly, but really. That's redemption in action. 5 months in, and I'd faced a major setback, but unlike previous setbacks in my life, I hadn't run from this one. I'd faced it with community, tools, and honesty, and I'd come through it stronger, with the unexpected gift of Robert's forgiveness, as a reminder that God's grace shows up in ways we can't predict. The journey wasn't over, probably never would be fully over. But I was learning to walk it with open hands instead of clenched fists, with community instead of isolation, with hope instead of despair. And that made all the difference. 6 months into learning that my shame didn't define me, I discovered that redemption creates ripples that extend far beyond what you can see. The weeks after receiving Robert's letter brought a new sense of peace, not the absence of struggle, but a deeper settledness in my identity. I was someone who'd been forgiven by Robert, by God, and slowly by myself. At work, the project with Marcus Chen's company was thriving, and Marcus himself reached out to ask if I'd be willing to speak at their company's annual retreat about integrity and taking responsibility. We want our employees to understand that everyone makes mistakes, he explained, but what matters is how you handle them. Your story exemplifies that. Would you be willing to share it? The request terrified me. Speaking to a room full of executives about my ethical failure? But I remembered what I'd learned. Hiding gives shame power. Honesty takes it away. Yes, I'll do it. The presentation was scheduled for the following month, which gave me time to spiral with anxiety, but also time to prepare thoughtfully. I worked with Dr. Chen in therapy to craft a message that was honest without being self-indulgent, that took responsibility without dwelling in shame. The key, Dr. Chen said, is to tell the story as someone who's learned from it, not someone still drowning in it. You're not asking for their sympathy. You're offering them the wisdom you've gained. At the Wednesday group, which had grown to 20 regular attendees, I shared about the upcoming presentation. Jordan, who'd been coming for 3 months now, said, "You're going to speak to a room full of business people about your ethical failure. That's incredibly brave. Or incredibly stupid," I said. "I'm still figuring out which." Grace smiled. "It's both. All acts of real courage feel stupid right before you do them. But this is exactly what redemption looks like, using your failure to help others avoid similar failures, or to help them face their own failures more honestly." A new member, a man named Kevin, spoke up. "I work in corporate finance, and we have ethical violations happen all the time. People look the other way, bend rules, justify questionable decisions. If someone like you, someone who actually faced the consequences of those decisions, spoke to our company, it might actually make people think twice." His words encouraged me. Maybe my story could create change, not just in individuals, but in organizational culture. The week before the presentation, Alex approached me at work. "David, I need to tell you something. I decided to come clean about the exam I cheated on in college." "What? Why?" "That was years ago. Because I can't keep building my life on something dishonest. You taught me that, so I contacted my old university, explained what happened, and asked what I needed to do to make it right. What did they say? They're reviewing it. Might revoke the grade, which could affect my degree status. I might have to retake the class. I don't know. But either way, I'm not carrying that secret anymore, and that feels better than any grade ever could. His decision moved me. My willingness to face my shame had given him courage to face his. That was redemption multiplying. The day of the presentation came. About 75 executives and employees from Marcus Chen's company filled the conference room. I stood at the front, looking at their faces, and took a breath. My name is David. 12 years ago, I worked for a company that committed fraud, and I was part of it. Not the mastermind, not the main perpetrator, but a willing participant. I falsified reports, inflated numbers, helped deceive clients. I told myself I was just following orders, but I knew it was wrong, and I did it anyway. The room was completely silent. I continued. When the fraud was discovered and investigated, I managed to avoid serious consequences. Others lost their jobs, their reputations, their careers. I quietly left and started over in a new city, and I spent 12 years running from what I'd done. 6 months ago, I finally stopped running. I faced what I'd done. I reached out to people I'd hurt, including your colleague Marcus Chen's father, Robert. I took responsibility. I stopped hiding. I talked about the shame I'd carried, the toll it took, the freedom that came from facing it honestly, the community that supported me, the grace I'd learned to receive. Here's what I want you to understand. Ethical violations don't happen in a vacuum. They happen when people are afraid to speak up. When organizational culture values results over integrity. When individuals convince themselves that everyone bends the rules. So why shouldn't they? I'm not here to tell you I'm better than anyone else. I'm here to tell you I know what it's like to compromise your values for job security. And I know what it costs. It costs your peace, your integrity, your ability to look yourself in the mirror. But I'm also here to tell you that it's never too late to change, to take responsibility, to stop running from your failures and start learning from them. After I finished, there was a moment of silence, then questions, some skeptical. How do we know you've really changed? Some curious. What would you do differently now? Some personal. I've done something I'm ashamed of. How did you start facing it? I answered as honestly as I could, not defensively, not trying to prove anything, just sharing what I'd learned. After the presentation, at least a dozen people approached me. Some shared their own ethical struggles. Some thanked me for being honest. One man said, "I've been looking the other way on something I know is wrong. Your story convinced me I need to speak up." Marcus Chen pulled me aside. That was powerful. Several executives told me afterward they want to revise our ethics training. Your story highlighted gaps in our corporate culture that we need to address. Driving home, I felt overwhelmed. My failure, the thing I'd hidden for 12 years, was being used to create positive change, not just in individuals, but potentially in organizational systems. That was redemption I couldn't have imagined. At the next Wednesday group, I shared about the presentation and the responses. Grace said, "This is what God does with our failures. He doesn't waste them. He redeems them, uses them to create change we could never create from a place of perfection." Thomas added, "You know what's amazing? If you'd never made that mistake, you'd never have this story. You'd never be able to help people the way you are now. I'm not saying the mistake was good, but I am saying God is using it for good." That Sunday, I was asked to share my testimony at the main church service, not just my story, but the full arc, the failure, the hiding, the facing it, the redemption, the ongoing journey. Standing on stage in front of 500 people, I felt that familiar flutter of anxiety, but I also felt solid, grounded. This was my story, and I was no longer ashamed to tell it. I talked about Robert's letter, about Alex deciding to come clean, about Jordan getting baptized, about speaking to Marcus Chen's company, about watching my shame transform from something that controlled me to something that helped others. 6 months ago, I said, if someone had told me I'd be standing here sharing this story publicly, I wouldn't have believed them. I was too ashamed, too convinced my failure disqualified me from ever being useful to anyone. But I've learned something. God doesn't wait for us to be perfect to use us. He uses our mess, our failures, our shame, and he transforms them into tools for healing, not just our healing, but healing for everyone who's watching. After the service, a teenage boy approached me with his parents. "I did something I'm really ashamed of," he said, "and I've been thinking about, I don't know, hurting myself because I can't live with it. But hearing your story, maybe there's a way through this?" I sat with him and his parents, sharing resources, encouraging him to get help, reminding him that shame doesn't have to be a life sentence. His mother thanked me with tears in her eyes. "You might have just saved our son's life." That week, I received an email from a stranger who'd seen the video of my church testimony. She'd carried shame about an abortion for 20 years, convinced she was unforgivable. "Your story gave me hope that maybe I can be forgiven too." Another email came from a man in prison who'd read a transcript of my story that someone had printed and shared with inmates. "I thought my mistakes meant I was worthless forever, but you're showing me that's not true." The emails kept coming. From across the country, from people I'd never met, sharing their own shame and thanking me for showing them redemption was possible. At therapy, Dr. Chen observed, "Your story has taken on a life of its own. Are you comfortable with that?" Honestly, it's overwhelming, but also, this is why I had to face my shame, not just for me, but for everyone who needed to see that facing it was possible, that redemption was real. How are you doing with the attention? Some days I handle it well. Some days I feel like a fraud. Like, who am I to help people when I'm still figuring this out myself? But then I remember I'm not helping people from a place of having arrived. I'm helping them from a place of being on the journey. And that's actually more helpful. That evening at the Wednesday group, which now had 25 regular attendees and had spawned 2 additional groups, I looked around at all the faces. People at different stages of facing their shame. People learning, growing, healing together. Jordan was there, 6 months sober and preparing to try for custody of his kids again. Alex was there, having received notification from his university that he'd need to retake the class, but could keep his degree. Michelle was there, still estranged from her sister, but learning to move forward anyway. Kevin was there, having spoken up about the ethical violation at his company and helping implement new policies. And dozens of others, each with their own story of shame being faced and slowly redeemed. "Look at this room," Grace said. 6 months ago, most of you weren't here. You were carrying your shame alone, convinced you were beyond help. But David had the courage to face his shame publicly, and it created permission for all of you to face yours. That's the power of redemption. It multiplies. Walking to my car that night, I thought about the past 6 months. The journey from secret shame to public testimony, from hiding to helping, from being controlled by my past to using it to create change. I updated my journal. 6 months ago, I heard words that changed everything. "I see your shame, but it doesn't define you." I've spent these months learning what that means, learning to face shame instead of running, learning to receive forgiveness instead of earning it. Learning that my failure doesn't disqualify me from being useful. It actually makes me more useful to others who are struggling. I've spoken to a corporate conference about ethics. I've shared my story at church multiple times. I've helped start new shame support groups. I've received hundreds of emails and messages from people saying my story gave them hope. My failure, the thing I hid for 12 years, is now the thing creating the most positive impact in the world. Not because the failure itself was good, but because I finally faced it honestly. And in that facing, in that vulnerability, I'm giving other people permission to face their own shame. I did something terrible 12 years ago. Robert forgave me before he died. God has been redeeming it all along, and now I'm watching that redemption ripple out to dozens, hundreds, maybe thousands of people. That's what happens when shame is dragged into the light. It loses its power to destroy and gains power to heal. Not just you, but everyone watching your journey. I'm not perfect. I still struggle sometimes. Shame still tries to come back. But I know what to do now. I have tools. I have community. I have a God who sees my shame and refuses to let it define me. And I have a story that's helping others believe redemption is possible for them too. That's worth everything. 6 months in, and my life was unrecognizable from where it started. Not because I was perfect, but because I'd learned to be honest. Not because my shame had disappeared, but because I'd learned it didn't have to control me. And that honesty, that freedom, it was creating change I never could have imagined when I first heard those words. I see your shame, but it doesn't define you. 1 year after that desperate realization in my apartment, 1 year after I understood I couldn't keep running from my shame, I stood in the same space, but everything was different. It was early morning, and I'd woken up thinking about how far I'd come. Not just the external changes, the community, the speaking opportunities, the people I'd helped, but the internal transformation. The way I saw myself, the way I carried my past. I looked in the mirror and saw someone I recognized. Not perfect, not without scars, but no longer defined by my worst mistake. Someone who'd faced shame and learned it didn't have to be a life sentence. My phone buzzed with a text from Jordan. 1 year ago today, you invited me to the Wednesday group. Changed my life, thank you. I smiled. He was right, it had been almost exactly a year, and Jordan was thriving now. He had custody of his kids again. He was working steadily. He was co-facilitating one of the Wednesday groups that had spun off from the original. Lauren, my colleague from work, texted, "Coffee this morning? Want to hear your advice on something." We met at a coffee shop, and she told me about an ethical dilemma at her company. Something that wasn't illegal, but felt wrong. She was being pressured to go along with it. "I remembered your story," she said, "about how you went along with something you knew was wrong and how much it cost you. I don't want to make that same mistake, but I'm afraid of losing my job if I speak up. What would it cost you not to speak up? Not today, but over the next 12 years. She nodded slowly. "More than my job is worth. You're right, I need to speak up. It might cost you. I won't pretend it won't, but you'll be able to live with yourself. And that matters more than any job." Watching her walk away with determination in her step, I felt grateful. My story, the failure I'd hidden for 12 years, was helping people make better choices. That was redemption in real time. That evening was the 1-year anniversary meeting of our original Wednesday group. Grace had organized it as a celebration, inviting everyone who'd been part of the community over the past year. About 40 people showed up. Current members, people who'd since moved on, people who'd started their own groups. The room was filled with faces I recognized, stories I knew, transformations I'd witnessed. Grace opened the evening by asking each person to share briefly what had changed for them over the past year. Thomas: 1 year ago I was 2 years sober, but still carrying crushing shame about who I'd been. Today I'm 3 years sober and co-facilitating a group for people in recovery. My shame doesn't control me anymore. Michelle: my sister still won't speak to me. That hurts, but I've learned I can move forward even without her forgiveness. I'm not waiting for her approval to live my life. Jordan: 1 year ago I was suicidal because of my shame. Today I have my kids back. I'm helping others who've made terrible mistakes. I'm living proof that redemption is possible. Kevin: I spoke up about the ethical violation at my company. Got fired for it. But I found a better job at a company with real integrity. And I can sleep at night now. Worth it. Alex: I came clean about my college cheating. Had to retake the class, but I'm not living with that secret anymore. And David showed me that was possible. Person after person shared stories of transformation. Not perfect stories, not everything's amazing now stories, but real stories of shame being faced, responsibility being taken, redemption being received. When it was my turn, I looked around at all these faces, people I'd walked with, people who'd walked with me. A community built on honesty about our failures. 1 year ago, I came to this church carrying a weight I'd been hiding for 12 years. I'd convinced myself that if anyone really knew what I'd done, I'd be rejected. That my shame had to stay secret to survive. But I heard words that challenged that. I see your shame, but it doesn't define you. And this year has been a journey of learning what that means. I've faced the people I hurt. I've taken responsibility publicly. I've been baptized. I've spoken to corporate conferences. I've helped others face their shame. I've received forgiveness I didn't think I'd ever get. And I've learned that redemption is real. But I want to be honest, I still struggle sometimes. Shame still tries to come back. I still have days where I question whether I deserve the good things in my life. This isn't a story about arriving at perfect healing. It's a story about learning to walk through ongoing healing with tools and community and grace. What's changed isn't that my shame disappeared. It's that it lost its power to control me, to keep me hidden, to define my entire identity. I'm someone who made serious mistakes, and I'm someone who's being redeemed. Both things are true, and I've learned to hold both truths with honesty and hope. After I finished, Grace spoke. David, I want to thank you. Your willingness to face your shame publicly created permission for everyone in this room to face theirs. Your story multiplied, and now we have a community of 40 people, and growing, who are learning that shame doesn't have to be a life sentence. That's what happens when one person has the courage to be honest. Later that evening, a young woman approached me. She'd been sitting in the back, her first time at any of our groups. I heard about this group from a friend. I've been carrying shame about something for 5 years, and I've been too afraid to tell anyone. But hearing all these stories tonight, maybe I can. You can. That's what this community is for. People who understand, who've been there, who know shame doesn't have to be the end of your story. How do I start? You start by showing up, by being honest, by dragging your shame into the light where it can't control you anymore. You start exactly where you are. The next day, I had lunch with Helen from work. She wanted to update me on the office. I'd recently been promoted to creative director, and she'd been my biggest supporter through the process. You know what the team says about you? She asked. They say you're the most honest leader they've ever had, that you create safety for people to admit mistakes because you're so open about your own. That's rare, David. That's valuable. I spent 12 years hiding my mistakes. I don't want anyone else to waste their life doing that. Well, it's working. We have the healthiest team culture in the company, and it's because you modeled vulnerability. That Sunday, I was invited to give the main sermon at church. Pastor Grace had preached almost every Sunday for the past year, but she felt it was important for others in the community to share their stories too. Standing on stage in front of 600 people, I felt nervous but steady. I knew what I wanted to say. My name is David. 1 year ago, I stood in my apartment carrying a weight I'd been hiding for 12 years. A shame so deep I believed it defined who I was, that if anyone really knew what I'd done, they'd see me as irredeemable. But that night I prayed desperately, and I heard words that changed my life. I see your shame, but it doesn't define you. This year has been a journey of learning to believe those words, not just intellectually, but in my bones, in my daily life, in how I see myself. I talked about the journey, making amends, getting baptized, facing Marcus Chen, receiving Robert's letter, helping others, speaking publicly, building community. All of it. Here's what I want you to understand. Shame is a liar. It tells you that you are your worst moment, that you're beyond redemption, that you have to keep hiding to survive. But all of those things are lies. The truth is, God sees your shame, really sees it, knows every detail, and He says it doesn't define you. He says you're His, you're loved, you're being redeemed. Your failures are part of your story, but they're not the whole story. I paused, looking out at the congregation. If you're sitting here carrying shame about something you did or something done to you, I want to tell you, you don't have to carry it alone. You don't have to let it control your whole life. You can face it, take responsibility where needed, and discover that redemption is real. It won't be easy, it won't be quick. You'll have setbacks. You'll have days where the shame feels just as heavy as it ever did. But you'll also have days where you realize it's losing its grip. where you see yourself the way God sees you, not defined by your failures, but by His love. 1 year ago, I couldn't have imagined standing here, couldn't have imagined telling my story publicly, couldn't have imagined using my failure to help others. But that's what God does with our shame when we finally face it. He redeems it, uses it, transforms it into something that heals not just us, but everyone watching. After the service, at least 50 people approached me. Some wanted to join a Wednesday group. Some wanted to share their own shame stories. Some just wanted to say thank you for being honest. One elderly man, tears in his eyes, said, "I'm 78 years old. I've carried shame about something for 60 years. 60 years. And I've never told anyone. But hearing you today, I think I'm ready to stop hiding." That week, I received a call from a producer at a Christian media company. They wanted to interview me for a podcast about shame and redemption. "Your story is resonating with thousands of people. We think it could help even more." I agreed, though the thought of my story reaching that many people felt overwhelming. But I remembered what I'd learned. My story wasn't about me anymore. It was about showing others that redemption was possible. The podcast interview was scheduled for the following month, which gave me time to process with Dr. Chen in therapy. You're becoming a public figure in a way. How does that feel? Surreal, terrifying, but also, if my story can help people stop hiding their shame, then it's worth it, even if it means being vulnerable on a massive scale. That's mature wisdom, David. You're not seeking attention. You're using your platform to create change. At the next Wednesday group, which now had 30 regular attendees, I shared about the podcast and the responses from the church service. A new member, a woman named Patricia, said, "I almost didn't come tonight. I've been carrying shame about something for 15 years, but I saw a clip of your church testimony online, and I thought, if he can be that honest, maybe I can try." You can. That's what this community is for. Over the next few weeks, I watched ripples continue to spread. Lauren stood up to her company about the ethical issue and ended up getting promoted for her integrity. The teenage boy I'd talked to after the church service was in therapy and doing better. Jordan's custody arrangement was formalized, and his kids were thriving. Alex had finished retaking his college class and graduated with his corrected degree. "I'm free," he told me. "For the first time in years, I'm actually free. No secrets, no shame hanging over me. And it's because you showed me it was possible." One evening, I received an email from Jennifer, the former co-worker, who'd been so angry when I first reached out. She'd been silent for months. "David, I've been watching your journey from a distance, social media, mutual connections, and I wanted to tell you something. I forgive you, not because what happened doesn't still hurt, not because the impact on my career wasn't real, but because holding on to anger has been poisoning me, and because I can see you've actually changed. You're not the person you were 12 years ago. That matters. I wish you well. Jennifer." I read the email 3 times, overwhelmed with gratitude. First Robert, now Jennifer. The 2 people whose anger I'd most feared, both offering forgiveness. Not erasure of the past, but recognition that I'd changed. That night I wrote my final journal entry for this year of transformation. 1 year ago, I heard words that began changing everything. "I see your shame, but it doesn't define you." This year, I've lived those words. I've faced what I did. I've taken responsibility. I've stopped hiding. I've received forgiveness I didn't think I deserved. I've helped dozens of others face their shame. I've watched community form around honesty and vulnerability. I did something terrible 12 years ago, that's true, but I'm also someone who's faced it, grown from it, and is using it to help others. Both things are true. Shame told me I was irredeemable. God said I was His. Shame told me to hide. God said to come into the light. Shame told me my past defined me. God said He was making me new. I'm learning that God was right. My shame is real. My past really happened, but it doesn't get to be my whole story. It's one chapter in a larger story of redemption. To anyone reading this who's carrying shame, you don't have to carry it alone. You don't have to let it control your whole life. You can face it, take responsibility, drag it into the light where it loses its power, build community with people who understand, and discover that God really does see your shame, but refuses to let it define you. It won't be easy. You'll have setbacks. You'll have days where the shame feels overwhelming, but you'll also have days where you realize you're free, where you look in the mirror and see someone redeemed, where your story helps someone else believe redemption is possible for them. That's worth everything. The vulnerability, the hard work, the ongoing practice, all of it. Because shame is a liar, but redemption is real. And you, whoever you are, whatever you've done, you can be redeemed too. 1 year after that desperate moment in my apartment, I was different, not perfect, not finished, but no longer hiding, no longer defined by my shame, learning to live in the freedom of being fully known and fully loved. And that, imperfect and ongoing as it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever experienced. If you've walked with me through this journey, I want to ask you, what shame are you carrying? What are you hiding because you think it defines you? What would it mean to hear God say to you, I see your shame, but it doesn't define you? You don't have to stay hidden. You don't have to let shame control your life. You can face it, take responsibility, build community, and discover that redemption is real. Your shame doesn't define you, God does. And He says you're loved, you're His, you're being made new. That's the promise. That's the truth. That's what can change your life if you're willing to believe it. I see your shame, but it doesn't define you. Let those words sink in. Let them challenge you. Let them free you because they're true. More true than anything shame has ever told you. And they have the power to change everything.